I'd like to call the meeting of the Carson City Airport Authority to order. It is 6:05. We are at the Sierra Room in the Carson City Community Center, 851 East William Street, Carson City, Nevada. This is the meeting for Wednesday, July 18th, 2018. Next, we would like to call the roll. Madam Secretary.
Chairperson Law.
Here.
Vice Chair Val.
Here.
Member Barrett.
Here.
Member Golden.
Here.
Member Harris.
Here.
Member Harvey. Member Rogers.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. If you would rise and for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, we will go to item C, approval of the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. Does anyone have any corrections or changes to the minutes as submitted? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to approve the June minutes as written.
I move. Second.
Moved by Member Harris. Seconded by Member Barrett. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, nay? Carried by those present. Item D, modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. Items may be taken out of order. Items may be combined for consideration by the authority. Items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. Is there any suggestion for modification of the agenda? None heard. We'll move on. Item E, public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request the chairman to calendar the matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Is there any public comment at this time? None seen. We will move on. There is nothing under item F. We will move past that. We will go to item G, public hearings. Item 1, for possible action to approve Carson City Airport Authority participation in the local government pooled investment fund and authorization for staff to make the required filings. This is my item, and I would tell everyone that we finally got approval from the state treasurer to participate in the pooled fund. They are at a just under 2% income on the invested funds at this time. And I have the paperwork ready to make as the primary person responsible for moving funds in and out of the program, our airport manager, and then the chair. And I would propose that the chair and the treasurer be listed as secondary people who have backup powers on that, and that Mr. Takus be given reporting authority under that. In other words, they would provide him reports as well as us at appropriate periods. Are there any questions on how that works? I would be happy to answer any questions. I don't think there's any detail there. It's mostly like bank investment programs. You can accept that. You can put any amount in at any time, add to your deposit invested funds from time to time, and they're held in separate accounts according to the day and amount that it was received. Money can be removed from there, and of course it stops accumulating interest on the day it's removed from the fund. They do request that we tell the treasurer's office when we put the amount in how long it's to be available for investment. In other words, you can do 6 months or a year. And before that time period is up, you have to notify them as to whether you want the amounts rolled over or brought back into your agency. That's an outline of it. Are there any questions on it that I might be able to answer?
So there's a period after 6 months or a year, whichever one you say.
That is correct. Every separate deposit that you make has to have a declared investment time frame, and if you take it out, or if it gets to the end of that time frame, you have to notify them before the expiration date, or it will be rolled over. If you want it taken back out, you have to let them know.
Okay.
Same thing with the interest. The interest can be taken and put into your checking account at each quarter, or it can be rolled over into compounding the investment.
And what are we doing?
It would be my suggestion that the amounts be rolled over for another designated period of time, but that the interest be taken and deposited into our checking account for operational needs.
Are these rollovers for the same period as the initial investment?
Generally speaking, that's what they do. Otherwise, you need to take it out and put it back in for another amended period of time. Any other questions?
Did you consider requiring 2 signatures for money to move as opposed to just 1 signature?
There's not a provision in their plan for double signatures that I have seen in the agreement. But it is my suggestion that the amounts that are transferred be reported to the board, and that way we have another check on the amounts that are moved around. I've also agreed with Mr. Moen that we will keep a separate spreadsheet just to show the activity in those accounts, so that it can be reconciled by our bookkeeping and CPA people. Okay?
So what you're saying is...
Mr. Barrett.
What you're saying is that the airport manager would be the signatory, but you two would be the backup.
That is correct.
And the treasurer.
Yes, and that would change as the officers change, but yes. And each time we have an officer change, we have to submit a new form to the treasurer's office with new contact information. Okay, so is there any other discussion on that item? If not, I would move we approve the participation by the Carson City Airport Authority in the LGIP program and authorize the officers and staff to activate an account for the authority and report back to the authority on the amounts moved.
So moved.
I have a motion.
Second.
And I have a second, Mr. Vowell and Mr. Rogers. Any public comment on this item? Any further discussion on this item?
I just want to say that I think this is great progress, and I want to thank the chair for working on it, finding out about it, working on it, and getting this ready to go. So, well done.
Any further discussion, Mr. Rogers?
I just want to echo, what Mr. Harris said, that this level of detail, this attention to detail, some people might think of it as being, not necessary or excessive, but if we mind the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. So thank you very much.
All right, any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. None heard. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the next item. Item G2 for possible action to affirm board chair's appointment of a CCAA subcommittee to review statements of interest. For possible action to affirm board chair's appointment of CCA committee to review statements of interest and qualifications for airport architecture, engineering, and planning services contract. Again, I have established a subcommittee with the intent that that subcommittee strictly go through and set a rating scale and provide information back to us without recommendation. And Mr. Moen is on that committee, and I'd like for him to report on the previous meeting.
Thank you, Chair Law. We met the committee, which is comprised of Supervisor Barrett, Member Harris, and Member Vowell, and myself. We met on Friday with Member Barrett and Member Harris, and then I met yesterday with Member Vowell, and we discussed the outline that legal provided regarding open meeting law and the committee's responsibilities to not act instead of the full body, and that we developed a scoring sheet based upon the RFQ for both planning and engineering. They're separate scoring sheets. We have 5 applicants for the planning contract, and we have 4 applicants for the engineering contract, of which there is some crossover. So there are firms who've applied for both, and then there are a couple of entities that only applied for one on the engineering side and then 2 on the planning side. So our first process was to hand out the packets and the score sheets. We discussed those, our processes on developing the score mechanism based on the RFQ, and then compile that information. We're going to reconvene this Friday. We haven't set the time yet, and then we were going to see what our status is on the review process and how much more time. Our objective is to be able to come back with to the board on August meeting and provide the score sheets and the any other information the board may require to do a review and come up with a recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, Mr. Barrett, Mr. Vowell, do you have comments on the process other that would be enhancing that? Member Barrett.
I'm just curious as to what times works for everybody on Friday. Planning purpose.
Perhaps we could do that off time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, that being said, is there any public comment on this item? None heard. Any discussion on this item further from the committee? I would accept a motion to affirm the chairman's appointment of a subcommittee members and that they create the scoring and compilation of the data received.
So moved.
Member Rogers has moved that. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Vowell has seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Any public comment? None heard. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. None heard. Motion carries. Moving on to item 3. For possible action, discussion of the master plan airport facility alternatives in order to provide consultant with a recommended development concept. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair. Brian Fitzgerald Atkins, airport engineer. In my initial memo from last week, I had listed the website for the master plan. I'm hoping that the board members have had a chance to look at that website and review those documents. Has that been accomplished for the most part? Okay. Then Chapter 4, which is the important one at this time for the alternatives of the airport, was to investigate about changing up its designation from a B2 to a C2. What kind of realistic things could occur at that time? What kind of unrealistic things would happen in terms of restrictions and land purposes and so forth. So it was determined that to grow the airport to a C2 would be unrealistic because it would take away so much of what's around the airport. We're kind of constrained at this point with roads and other facilities around the airport to be that size. So it was more or less determined that a B2 airport would be where Carson City Airport would need to be. Also, lengthening the runway on either end. What would happen if we did that? The most important aspect they found out was that we could lengthen the runway no more than 600 feet, and the preferred alternative would be on the western end of the airport. Also to work on the Click Bond and Delta Charlie intersection at the North Apron to try and straighten that out. That is a key item that would be good to take care of, especially if the runway was to be lengthened at that point. But obviously that would involve a landowner off airport, and that would take a lot of negotiations, I believe, judging from conversations in the past. But it's still one of the more important things that they wanted to highlight is to straighten that portion out. Another item that was talked about was the approaches, to try and get the approaches down below 1 mile. What would that do to the airport? And essentially, it would cause a lot more problems to go to a half mile or even a 3/4 mile minimum. That a 1 mile minimum is the ideal for this particular airport, and then also to remove the night restrictions. To try and get the aircraft in who need those kinds of approaches in at night as well. So those are the main items that they were referring to in this chapter for the master plan. But there's plenty of other items to look at, and there's explanations as to why it is a good or a not so good idea if you haven't completely read through all that. Does the board, from their readings, have any recommendations for alternatives to pursue farther that may or may not be at the top of the list? Mr. Gold.
I have a couple questions for you, Brian. First off, on one comment on reduction of runway visual length from 1 mile to, say, 3/4 or a half mile. I think in a year's time, we may see one event like that in a year. I don't see that as a big deal. However, I have had numerous customers who are concerned about the night restriction, and I'm just kind of curious, where is that discussion going, and is it a feasibility? What is the feasibility to lift that night restriction on circling the land?
I'm actually going to have to get back to you on that one. My memory's a little foggy, but I do remember that we've instigated a request for better approaches at this point, and I don't remember exactly how far it has gotten at this point. So yes, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. I do apologize.
Okay, next question, or something to pursue. A precision approach. Now, I would think that perhaps an ILS is not feasible due to terrain. However, a WAS approach is feasible. Has that discussion been had yet?
I believe it has been discussed with the planners at this point. I'm not sure how far it has gone towards the FAA side at this point, but it is a discussion item.
Okay, that's the kind of thing that needs to be requested with the FAA. You can put in a request online with the FAA for a WAS approach just to get the ball rolling, regardless of the master plan. There's a means to do that.
If I could just respond, any of us can do that. I did it already. I went online and just filled it out. It bounced back. They were having trouble with their web page, but I recently got a response from them saying, "Are you still having a problem with our web page? Try again." But anybody can do that, and I suggest that as many of us that fly do that as we can, so they get a series of requests. And I did it both for the night approach on the 2.7 GPS approach, and I also did it for what else did I do it for? I did it for something else. Now I can't remember what else I did it for, but that GPS 2.7 approach is kind of a weird approach. It's a direct approach, but it kind of goes little steps around a turn, and then it takes you in. And when it does that kind of last turn, you're pretty close to the mountains that are on just to the south of you. And I was thinking maybe that's where this obstruction light would help or get us some mileage. I don't know if it will. But then the other problem with it is the missed approach. We have the mountains that climb pretty quickly on the west side of the airport, and so we would have to have a fairly quick missed approach. Now, they've got a fairly quick missed approach on the circle to land approach, instrument approach that comes from the south, because when you fly that approach, it's flippin' scary because you're descending right into the hill that's on the north side of the airport, and you're thinking something's got to be wrong with this approach. If I were doing this in the fog, I'd be worried that I'd run into that hill. But the missed approach there takes a very sharp turn to the right as soon as you get close to the runway if you don't pop out. And so I think they could do it with the other one, but I've heard that there's some reluctance there. That's just what I've heard.
And to go along with that, I remember Kurt Haukel from NDOT had initiated this as well. Verbiage, I believe, he sent to everybody, and he also put in a request himself for the airport.
Yeah, and keep in mind, too, that the state NDOT has been operating at the airport for years, and they do the circle to land at night. This is not a big deal, but we need to get that. That in particular should be a priority. That needs to get lifted, the circle to land at night, because, like I said, how often do we really have IMC conditions at this airport? We don't. Maybe a day in a year or a portion of a day in a year. Yet, because that's in the JEPS manual, we lose business as a result because that restriction is there. And you may say, well, gee, it's only at night. Well, in December, night is 5 o'clock.
It's part of the daytime.
You know, that's the problem.
It's the regular
One more comment that I will throw at you, and this is just my opinion. I don't speak for the other folks on the airport authority, the other authority members. I know you say that a runway extension is only 600 feet to the west. That's a possibility. 600 feet is 600 feet, and that is a significant amount of runway when you need it. And I can tell you that there was a patron who wanted to base at Carson City that has an office. They bought an office building right downtown here in Carson City, relocated their business from California, and the airplane is not at Carson City Airport because they were concerned about the runway length. And could they do it? Yes. But if they had to go, say, cross-country on a flight, they'd have to take the airplane up to Reno, refuel it, and then go across the country. And so there just isn't enough runway length for certain aircraft to operate safely. So an extra 600 feet at our field elevation of 4,700 feet will make a huge operational difference.
Thank you.
I'd just like to...
Member Harris.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make a comment on the night approach, and that is that has been the most continuously brought up issue at these meetings that I've attended. And as far as the people at the airport, I think there's a real desire for this improvement. And I would like to see it be the top three when we put this together. And then I'd like to, after we've agreed, and if it's on the top, then I'd like to talk about how can we get a more public approach to this so that we can make more noise with the FAA and get this moving, get it done faster rather than, have it 5 years out. It's something that the airport people want, and I'd like to give it to them.
Further comments? Mr. Takis.
I just wanted to add one other thing about the runway extension. We learned something at the last meeting that I didn't know before was the case, and apparently it's been a fairly recent change from the FAA, but you can't have a roadway in your runway safety area. And that is a limitation on the west side of the airport. It wouldn't be a limitation on the east. On the east, the limitation is the land drops off pretty rapidly, so we would have to find a way to fill that in and build out that way. But they were telling us that already our road touches the runway safety area and that that's not okay, and that if we were to extend the runway to the west, we'd have to reroute that road around it. And we're talking about Sconai Road, and that's going to be kind of a hard road to route around it because there's a hill going up right there. And so that was just a new wrinkle that I had not heard before until the Kaufman people made their presentation at this last meeting. So for what it's worth, that's going on too. One other thing, back to the night approach, I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Harris, that is a really critical issue. I don't know who's on point on that. I don't know if that should be the engineer or the airport manager. It's not me. I mean, I'm pushing on it from, a supporting role, but someone should really be designated as the point person to deal with the FAA, because I kind of get the feeling that we're all just kind of pumping on it, but we don't have a really directed or a focused effort. And so just make that suggestion.
Chair Law?
Mr. Moen.
At the FAA conference, I engaged the new regional representative for the MBAA regarding the nighttime restriction to that instrument approach. So he and I have been conversing back and forth on that. I know that one of the things that we need to do in looking at our capital projects is that we probably need to move the generator up farther on the list, because one of the issues for the nighttime approach is there's not backup power for the airport lighting system. So that is definitely a factor for that. So I think that's one of the things I think we should bump up. I am attending the SWAE conference in Sacramento next week, and I will be engaging not only Kaufman on that topic, but also trying to seek out other folks in the FAA that may be in attendance. But I agree. I think we may have limited instrument conditions during the year, but we have night every day. So I think that's really critical, especially in the instance of people are unfamiliar with the airport. They're not going to want to come in here at night, and people that are familiar, like NDOT, they'll cancel, go underneath, and scud run to find the airport. So they're much more comfortable in operating in that environment, where we don't want to put everybody in that scenario. So I think that should be a high priority. To follow on with Mr. Takes' comment, the FAA did say it was the RPZ that's impacted by GONAI, and that it's just a sliver of it in the current configuration, but the FAA does understand that roadways and that movement of those kind of infrastructure is really a big deal, and it may qualify us for a limited deferment on that, where they grandfather that road in. But if we're going to grow in any significant direction at all, that's going to have to be adjusted. And any alternative that involved a ILS or something just blew up the whole landscape, impacting Arrowhead, impacting Gonai, and impacting neighborhoods. So I think our general consensus is that we're going to grow within our current boundary, and then see how we can improve the operation with what we need to do as far as improving instrument approach conditions through wide area network, and try to get a precision approach. There may be a special type approach where you have certain climb restrictions, so pure jet aircraft could meet those perhaps, but smaller aircraft might not be able to. So there's some things that TERPS people can look at, and we're definitely going to put that higher on our priority list as far as which way we go as an organization outside growth of the runway.
Okay, the one thing that I would comment is I agree with you. Right now, there's a sliver of Gonai Road, and when we do the ring road resurfacing and that sort of thing, right now we are required to pay out of pocket without a match for that resurfacing on that ring road segment that falls within that zone. But if we were to broaden the 600 feet, that entire road would be under there. And as I read it in the documentation, we can apply for a grandfathered exception, but I don't know what the process for that is or what the likelihood of it getting granted would be. So that's, I think, my main concern, and maybe you could get a feel at the next conference as to whether those kinds of things have been allowed, and then report back to us on what you think the opportunity for that might be.
Absolutely. I think Gonai is probably a better opportunity to get grandfathered than the perimeter road. And the thing about the perimeter road, it's on our capital improvement plan to get improved. Well, that may just get moved around based upon that issue if we're looking, depending on our master plan. So I think that those are discussions that the engineer and the rest of the authority need to have as we get into the final development stage. But those are great comments, and I intend to feedback to to Kaufman Associates these comments and reiterate our concerns on some of these issues. So I'll make a response on that way, and I'll forward it back to all the authority members for their ability to also comment on that. So we can submit a combined document instead of 15.
Thank you. The other thing is, for the convenience of the secretary, would you please tell us what the acronym NBAA means?
I don't want to mess it up, but it's National Business Aircraft Association.
Thank you. All right. This is...
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Real quickly, also, if any of the members of the board have additional comments after the meeting, feel free to send them to the manager or to myself directly. We do have, like I said, a follow-up call with Kaufman to include any of your comments. That'll be done on Friday morning, so please feel free, if you have any additional, to send them to me.
Thank you. Also, I know this is not a actionable item for this evening, although it does say possible action. The one action I would think that we might want to do is to make our airport manager as the point person on the night approach.
Agreed.
Aspect of it. So, further comments, Mr. Val?
Since we teach these all the time, we go through them with a fine-tooth comb, and one of the things that we do is we go through the TERPS manual, and it's my recollection that the issue is not climb gradient, it's corridor width. It doesn't meet the minimum distance side to side, and I think that's, don't quote me on this, but I think it's 4 miles, which is why the GPS Alpha dives into that hill where it's at, because otherwise it'd be hitting the hills over there at Spooner. And it seems like logically, you look at it, it would make sense to move that over by a mile or so, and you'd be good all the way down to the ground. But the TERPS doesn't allow for that. So we don't allow any of our people to fly the GPS Alpha. It's completely off limits. We don't let anyone do it. And I think the reason for the night restriction is during the day, if you veer too far close to a hill, you'll see it. At night, you won't. So they gave us a little bit of a latitude on that RNAV 27, specifically because if you get too close to it, you can kind of like, oh, you see the hill, the train outside, you kind of nudge a little bit over. You can't do that at night. So I think from what we read on the TERPS that they're never going to approve it unless we can get some sort of a WAS. And I don't know if the WAS minimums are narrower as well as lower. I think they just go lower. I don't think they go narrower. But that said, I've lost count the number of times that ATC assigns that approach to people at night and tells them to go do it. Even though it clearly says on the chart, don't do it, they tell people all the time. Usually jet traffic, turbine traffic, they tell them go do it. Maybe it's an own risk thing. Maybe if they tell you that you can do it, maybe you can do it if you take the risk on your own to maintain the train clearance.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Is there any public discussion on this item?
I've got one more.
Mr. Harris.
On the master plan, there's also the part where they're talking about the hangars, where the future hangars would go and that sort of thing. Do you have what you need from the authority to I mean, there were several options, and I don't, as I look at it, I don't have any clear differentiator to say, yeah, this one's better than this one. So do you have enough direction to know what to do, what to say in the master plan about the hangar arrangements, and or how do you plan to proceed with that?
In terms of the hangars, the several alternatives that were shown in the master plan can potentially stay as is because there's such a variableness in the hangars. One day you can have somebody who wants to put little T hangars in, the next day you want a large executive hangar put in. So I believe if we just if you don't have any preferred alternatives, or you don't think that one is even realistic, then we can leave them all in as is, as part of the final, and that way we have several ways of going forward with those hangars.
The only thing I would add on that is for the alternative that shows the acquisition of the property that's to the northeast of the airport outside the fence. I think that they did that when they thought that this $1 billion might be available to us and that we might be able to buy that property outright so that we could develop it ourselves. I don't see that as a logical option at this point, since that $1 billion has been allocated to certain rural airports that we are not included in. So I don't know that option, unless we get a bequest from somebody that's a lot of money, I don't know what the price on that acreage is, but I don't see that in the foreseeable future the airport would have sufficient excess revenues to buy that unless we could get FAA assistance, and I don't see that that's really out there on the horizon. Mr. Moen.
The hangar development is really going to be driven by demand, so I don't think there's real benefit on trying to pick an alternative at this point. But I think the big thing as we move forward is to not constrain ourselves and to ensure that we have maximum potential out of that property. Maybe the directive going forward for the property east of the Bravo is that we try to get some sort of nailed down access points for now. But I do think we keep the request on our capital program about purchasing it. The FAA is in the business of protecting airports, and they see that through the fence access and property right next to the airport like that as a threat to the airport. So that doesn't mean that there won't be funding available at some point in time. And so I think we keep it on there, but maybe the direction we proceed for the time being is try to see if we can get some sort of concrete points of access that we can allow us to operate our own property and develop our own property.
Good point. Thank you. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, I would accept a motion to designate our airport manager as the point person on researching and determining the night approach option.
Moved.
Mr. Vell has moved. Mr. Harris has seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Any public comment? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion has carried.
I better get to work.
All right. Going on to item 4, for possible action to approve the leasehold lot line adjustments to parcel 38. Mr. Takus.
I can jump in. This is Mr. May's parcel, John May's parcel, and he was looking at putting in some solar panels to provide electric power for his hangar. And in the process, he discovered that his property line doesn't go as far as he thought it went. And in discussions with the airport engineer, Mr. Fitzgerald, and the airport manager realized that there is a chunk of land that's orphaned, that's like squeezed in between the fire and utility easement that's on the north, the back of the hangars from the jet ranch, the smaller hangars from the jet ranch, and John May's parcel. And so John May's offered to lease it from the airport, and not being people that want to walk away from rent on land that we can't otherwise use, the airport manager, the airport engineer, and I kind of joined together and said, sounds like a good idea to us. And so what you have before you is a lot line adjustment for his lease that basically brings his lease up a little further to the north so it abuts the fire and utility easement area. And in return, he'll be paying us the same rental rate that he is paying on the rest of his parcel. He is a prepaid tenant. At least he's prepaid for the next 23, 24 years, something like that. And so we included in there the option to prepay if that's easier for him to do. That would not result in a net present value reduction. It's not like give us a less amount now. It would be the total amount. And he understands that. And the reason for that is that when we get prepayment of rent, we can't spend the money until the money's earned. And that's the pitch we get from Beth Cohn, the CPA, whenever she appears. And so what you have before you is a lease amendment that does a lease line adjustment. And I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sure Mr. Fitzgerald and Mr. Moen are as well. Yes.
Mr. Golden.
Just to be clear, Steve, as I hold this document up, yeah, it's. Are we talking about that, the dihedral right there?
That's correct. You're talking about that dihedral that goes up there. And so,
Okay, that's all. That's it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, the one thing I just wanted to point out is it doesn't look like it matches up with the roof line of the building next to it, which is the back of the jet ranch. But as Mr. Fitzgerald pointed out to me, that's because the photo is purposely taken at an angle so you can get the dimension of the buildings. If you were actually looking straight down, that dihedral lines right up with the back of that other property line.
And if I may add, our surveyors went out and they verified the southern corners and placed the northern corners as well. So it does match. They were not walking into the middle of Jet Ranch to find a corner of that lease.
In the process, I ran it by the assessor's office just to find out what they would need. They said, well, we don't need it, but we prefer to have a record of survey map done. And so Mr. Mays went ahead and contacted him. If that gets billed to the airport, Mr. Mays said to make sure it gets billed back to him.
Yeah, we made the comment to Mr. Mays that this should be at no expense to the airport, so he's going to reimburse the airport for any expenses, including legal. And then we'll be following up with this next month also with Dennis G. and Greco's property for the lot line adjustment for the riser buildings. We do have the letter from the fire marshal acquiescing to the change, and then we'll also go back to Heritage Group and correct their lot line based upon where they put the riser building. So it's just kind of a cleanup on that, some of those leases as well.
Any further comments? Hearing none, is there any public comment on this item? Hearing none, I would accept a motion to approve the lot line adjustment on parcel number 38.
I would so move.
Mr. Golden has a motion. Mr. Barrett, was that you?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Golden has made the motion. Mr. Barrett has seconded the motion. Any further public comment? Any further discussion on the motion? None heard. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion has carried. Item number 5. For possible action, discussion to approve concept of developing a letter of agreement for unmanned aerial systems UAS test site within the Nevada Institute for Autonomous Systems NIAS at CXP. Mr. Moen.
Thank you. You may recall that during my interview process, I discussed potential of expanding the COA that NIAS has with the FAA regarding testing in the state of Nevada. So they have a certificate of authorization to conduct tests anywhere in the state, and they've done that extensively in the south. They've done it in Hawthorne, and they created a corridor around the Boulder City Airport that goes northbound, so about 15 miles long, that they can launch in that area at any time. That NIAS has used the Stead Airport as the official test site for UAV operations in Nevada, and I actually did some work with them back in March as part of a group testing that they did. And at that time, I got to see how their operation functioned, how they coordinated, and then what a difficulty it was for them to bring people out to observe that activity out at Stead. It was just, there were people from the state that were interested. There were other people, and it was just a long truck out to the Stead Airport. So in my conversations and relationships that I had developed with the Nevada Institute of Autonomous Systems, we started discussing just recently about the possibility of doing testing at Carson City due to the proximity of the state capitol. As many of you have heard my conversation before about how the airport is representative and should be representative of the state. And so I think this is a really good opportunity to raise the profile of the Carson Airport and be on the cutting edge of UAV testing and activity in the state. Well, what we did is we took a draft letter of agreement that was originally outlined for the Stead Airport. I made some slight modifications, and I think somewhere in here I left the Stead traffic name in here somewhere, so it's still there. I didn't want to deceive you and think that I wrote the whole thing in the beginning. But there's still a lot of work to be done to this draft. But what the point is to bring this forward to the authority to get some guidance on going forward with it.
You did that intentionally, right?
No.
Why, yes.
I would like to say so, but I'd lie, and that wouldn't be true. I wouldn't like to do that. What's really critical about this is that the FAA's really taken the gloves off on the UAVs. I mean, first it was you had to register them. Then it was you got to be certified. And then it was, well, now you don't have to be certified. Now you got to be outside 5 miles. Oh, you got to be at this altitude. And essentially now they can pretty much operate anywhere below 400 feet. But what we can do by putting this together with an agreement and making a test site, we can kind of bring some control to that madness and exercise that in a responsible manner on our airport. One of the questions I had while we're talking about this was, what does this mean for Carson City? Well, I think one of the things that it means for Carson City is the ability to draw and attract drone operators and drone companies to our airport, and to put some control in place so that the gloves aren't off, and that we do have some rules and regulations to operate under, and therefore make it a much safer operation to have this test site range set up versus to just do it, willy-nilly. Yeah. And how else can it benefit us? Whether it's attracting a company. I do have a company that's based in Reno now whose lease is running out and is looking at our airport. They're a big-time operator. But it also allows us to develop a fee structure for utilizing our test range. And so there could be some direct return to the airport through fees and whatnot, whether it's leasing the range, whether it's leasing buildings or office space, whether it's building a new facility. And so I think that gives us a lot of opportunity to move in the direction that aviation is going. I don't see the clock turning back on UAV activity. I see it ramping up, if anything, and I feel that we as an organization, we're in a lot better position to start with a structure like this and with a group like NIAS. And if you're not familiar, NIAS is a part of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, so that brings another higher level of interest in our facility, in our airport, and I think with that, it can bring a lot more benefit going forward than there is negativity as a result of UAV on the airport. So it's very general information. I'm not really looking for comments on the particulars at this point in time. I think that's something that we'll go back with NIAS and start working through, but I'm looking for the direction to do that and be the point person on getting that moving forward.
Any questions of Mr. Moen on this item?
No, but I have a comment.
Mr. Val?
Okay.
So based on past experiences with almost hitting drones here at the airport, there's nothing that I see here in the LOA that seems irresponsible on the part of the folks that would be operating this. But my concern is for someone who's not in tune or understanding of the rules, like a hobbyist who lives near the airport and sees these drones flying around, what kind of steps can we take along with these guys to educate the other folks that live nearby the airport to keep them from doing what they've done in the past, which was flying a drone into the direct flight path of an airplane that was landing? I don't think these guys would do it, but my concern is that if somebody who's not initiated and understands what's going on sees a drone flying around, they're going to think it's okay.
I get calls regularly about people operating, or where can they operate, how should they operate in this valley. And it's construction companies, it's photographers, it's hobbyists, and I keep turning them back to the FAA criteria and trying to get them involved in that. Now, in light of all of that, just on this Monday, the 16th, we had a drone strike at our airport, and it didn't really come to light that that's what it was until this morning, more late yesterday. A helicopter operating, overflying our airport from south to north. At first thought they had a bird strike. Believe it hit the tail rotor. They could feel the vibration in the aircraft, made an immediate landing. They didn't, there was, landed right in front of our terminal building on one of the circles. And I went out and engaged the flight crew, and they were like, yeah, something felt weird. we came back, we did a landing. And so they were a little cagey about what they suspected. As we saw them, I was out there yesterday, and they were out working on the aircraft. I'm like, okay, this kind of expanded a little bit. Let's get a feel for what it is. And it was more or less this morning that we got the feeling that, no, this is a real deal. And so I encouraged them. I said, hey, did you guys report this strike? And they go, oh, yeah, we reported in-house. I said, well, no, we got to expand this. So the reason I'm telling you that now, I was going to discuss that in my manager's report, but this is a real live incident. And so we brought out, not only did I call the FAA, Don Morgan, they requested that we contact the Sheriff's Department, that they come out and interview the crew. They file a police report. So what we were hoping was that the Sheriff's Department might say, yeah, somebody called us and said there was pieces of a drone in their backyard yesterday or in the street. So this activity is going to go on whether they see somebody operating to the north part and the northeast part of our field. But what we can do is, by heightening the level of awareness in the community, is that we can try to get on the front end of this versus trying to chase it on the backside. Is that going to prevent somebody from walking out by the John Winter Recreation Area and launching a drone? Probably not. But if we can get the community to engage in that and say, hey, yeah, I saw that activity there, or I'm aware of this activity, I think we'll be a safer airport for that. But it's not going away by any stretch. But the letter of agreement is really designed to strengthen any operations out there by specific procedures and personnel that are on the ground, as far as spotters and professional operators. So I think we would be better served by taking this approach than just trying to see how it develops in the industry. Yes, sir.
Mr. Barrett, did you have a question?
No, I just have a comment at the end. Go ahead.
Mr. Golden?
Just for clarification, and maybe it's because I didn't understand that draft, but when you refer to drone or UAV or UAS, that's a broad spectrum. What are we talking about? Are we talking about VTOL, little things launching, or are we talking about true drones that are using the runway and the airspace?
Any of the testing that I've been involved in has been the typical UAV that you've seen, which is the quadcopter and that sort of thing. However, I did observe it looked like an RC plane. Essentially, there was one with floats that they were using out at Stead, but it was probably this maybe half the size of this table. I know that one company that is talking about looking to relocate here uses very large aircraft. I mean, upwards of the 55-pound range. The testing is going to expand. How's that look right now? I think it's more of they're more testing about how to deconflict with manned traffic. That's really where their mission is, and they're deeply involved with NASA on writing these rules and regs and testing procedures about deconfliction. And a lot of that is simulated, where the sensors on the drone are feeding back to NASA, and they are projecting artificial targets into that, and then creating these deconflictions. And the deconflictions can involve descents, it can involve change of course, it can involve the UAV immediately landing. So it's very technical, and it's really cutting edge, because this is something NASA has been basically tasked with at the national level to kind of come up with some programs on this. But the ADSB is going to be the real driver in all this deconfliction stuff, because that's the cutting edge that we're going to in manned aircraft. And there's no reason whatsoever that won't start to exist in the UAV realm as well. So right now, I think it's limited to the smaller, but it could be expanded at some point in time, and I don't even know what that looks like.
Mr. Rogers.
I think I think the future belongs to UAVs. I think that it's mandatory that we try to be at the cutting edge rather than trail. But I think that there's a two-pronged, there's a safety-related public information campaign that is required of the leaders into that space. But in addition to that, I think if you're going to promote Carson City as being a front runner, as a leader, there's a public information campaign that belongs there as well. Hey, look what we're doing, Carson City. We're out in front of this, trend, and that's a good thing for Carson City, and that a marketing, so to speak, campaign belongs as part of us starting to work with UAVs. So, I think that if we're going to do that, it's incumbent on somebody to come up with some money to do a public information campaign. To Mr. Vowell's, point, we have to have a public information campaign that says, "Hey, look what we're doing," and oh, by the way, this doesn't mean you get to fly your little personal drone on airport airspace. I think to be correct and effective managers of the airport, if we're going to try to lead into the UAV marketplace, we have to, as an airport authority, either commit funds to doing the public information campaign or have that money come to us from GOED or from NIAS. But to say that nobody is going to spend any money on a public information campaign, I think is irresponsible.
Mr. Val.
One more comment. Public information is nice and all that, but public support, I think, is also important. And the night that I was at the controls and we were coming in and the drone was in the flight path not moving, we couldn't figure out what it was at first. It looked like somebody had erected a tower or something that had a light because it was stationary. Once we got around it, we immediately called the sheriff, and the response was really lackluster. They basically were like, well, we didn't say who did it, so it's not a big deal. And we were, the two of us that were in the aircraft were really lit about the whole thing, because low and slow, an impact with some other device like that could have been the difference between whether we were able to land safely or crash out in the tree somewhere. They sent a single sheriff's deputy who basically didn't go and investigate or anything like that, look around the neighborhood. And that was the incident that prompted me to bring this up to the board the first time, where I said, hey, we need to do some kind of public outreach to that neighborhood, because these rogue operators that are just drinking the beers and playing with their toys out there, they're going to get somebody killed. And we saw where it landed, we knew where it was, and the city basically took no interest in investigating that and going any further with it. So it's great to reach out to the public, but I think the message needs to be clear, and I think the rest of the governmental entities other than just this board need to be involved and serious about, flight safety in general. And, if that had ended up in a crash, how long ago was it before they figured out on that helicopter what the issue was? A couple of days went by. Nobody was looking in the right area because they didn't know what they were looking for.
That's a great point, and I think you've probably heard many of these discussions when there was a trend of laser lights being flashed in flight decks and cockpits, and it did finally get the attention of the local sheriff. But whether or not they could run out and actually locate or find somebody, that's been pretty much a hit and miss type thing. They've occasionally popped somebody for that. But yeah, I think it would be a community-wide approach that we would go work with the city and with the other entities and the sheriff's office and whatnot to try to get that information out. When Reno was designated as a test site, they had a big push with the media about what that meant and how that was to operate. They always followed that up with, hey, these are professional operators. This is not a toy thing, and this isn't the kind of activity that will be going on out there. I think it's important that we do engage the amateur and work through the Best Buys and the Costco's and those people that are selling them to help get that information in their hands. And I think the FAA tried that in the beginning through the AMA, the American Model Aircraft Association, if that's, I may not have the acronym totally correct, but they were originally required everybody to license them, and then they backed off on that. So, part of this is on the FAA as far as, trying to make a decision on how they're going to go. But I believe now with the testing of the Lance system, which is a real-time approval system within the National Airspace System, Reno is a test site for that, as is, I think Tahoe is going to be rolled out, and Truckee is going to be rolled out. But these allow the professionals to get real-time approval based upon where they're going to operate, and there are certain restrictions on those areas. It is the amateur that we are going to be battling, and so it's going to take a lot of public outreach and how to do that, whether it's paid advertising, whether it's community events, whether it's I know the NVAA had a big presentation on UAV operations just this last April about how to raise the bar on that. So I don't know the answer, but I think that's a very good point, Mr. Rogers, that we do need to have a public outreach campaign. And I saw that based on the event in the last couple of days, that if that's just to the neighborhood to our south, well, shoot, that's just too close. And so we need to get out in that community, and we'll have to brainstorm on how to do that most effectively.
Any further questions or comments?
I have a question for you, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Barrett.
Is there going to be a motion and action on this? It says for possible action.
Yes, there will be.
Okay, then I need to tell you that my wife works for the Governor's Office of Economic Development. She works as a community development block grant administrator for the rural counties of Nevada, but I still think that this puts me in the position of abstaining on anything, just out of caution as a possible conflict of interest.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this item? Any public comment on this item? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the concept of developing a letter of agreement for unmanned aerial systems, UAS, test site with the NIAS at the Carson City Airport, as well as authorizing research on a public information campaign related and PSAs if necessary, and authorize the airport manager to proceed with those investigations and actions.
I'll move.
Mr. Golden has moved.
Second.
Mr. Rogers has seconded the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Any public comment on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Abstention.
One abstention. And the motion has carried. Next on the agenda is the airport engineer's report. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Brian Fitzgerald Atkins again, airport engineer. Already discussed the master plan earlier. The other project we have going on is the taxiways project. Last meeting we got the grant application put together and sent off to the FAA. They had indicated a minimum of 60 days possession of that before grant offers would go out. So we're approximately halfway through that time frame. Obviously, I don't expect to hear anything until that time, maybe sometime late August, for this particular project, which definitely puts the start date after the air races. So we won't have to conflict with that. That was a pretty big week that we do not want to start our project on. So it's just right now the wait and see. Any questions on this project?
Any questions, Mr. Fitzgerald? Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Moving on to the airport manager's report, item I.
Well, I'll dovetail on Mr. Fitzgerald's comments. Mr. Takis and I did attend the Board of Supervisors meeting on July 5th and briefed the board on the grant and looked for their approval to accept it when offered by the FAA, and they did vote in favor of that. So we're just in the wait and see mode, but as soon as that happens, I believe we have like a really short window to get everything signed. It's like 10 days. So Mr. Takis and I will be in a position to make sure we get that accomplished and get that grant turned around. Man, I got a lot to talk about this month. We just, I'm going to be celebrating my 120th day in a row here at Carson City Airport. It feels like it's been a lot longer, I have to tell you. But the first 90 days, or the first 120 days, we focused on meeting tenants and getting into the community. But the big event was the open house. I'll touch a little bit more on that here in a moment. I have spoken a couple different times in the community. I met with the Kiwanis Club here on the 12th and discussed the airport and what the airport means to the community of Carson, to that group. And we hosted about 70 campers on Tuesday to do a little tour of the airport and Cactus Air Force. That was like herding cats. That was a bunch of 6-year-olds in the first group and a little, not much more mature 9-year-olds in the second group. But I have to say the 6-year-olds are really enamored with the Echo in the terminal building. So they really had a lot of fun with that. But Cactus Air Force was great. They opened up a couple aircraft and had a couple vehicles out front, and the kids got to climb and touch and see a bunch of stuff. So that was really good. We do have the trespasser may be back on our airport. Not that we have cited him, but we have seen a couple things that suggest that somebody's been there, like the rearrangement of the picnic tables. Gary's truck was kind of rearranged the material in the back of the pickup to his liking. And we did have a hide key, and the hide key has been located by our perhaps trespasser. And so we have rekeyed the front door, on the south end of the building, the manager's office, and the door that leads to the west side. So we're going to rekey the other ones as soon as we get those are the immediate focus. But we did alert Capital City Patrol about it, and so they stepped up their surveillance. And we did kind of a funny thing. I thought that we put a note out for our trespasser because Gary knows his name. His name is Alton, and so we said, "Hey Alton, we know you're back. Bring our key." So we'll see if he shows back up. Maybe that's enough to scare him away. I don't know, but that was just this last week. Moving on, Cohen and Company will be doing our audit, so we're trying to close out the books. We probably have that about 99% done. There may be one or two things out there that we still impact the June report, but I believe we're really close on that. And also in line with that, we did begin with Bolus and Company is doing a transitioning to do our bookkeeping. So met with them and set up the remote desktop for them to be able to be on and make entries. They'll be able to see, view stuff in our bank account, but they won't be able to write checks or any of that nature. So what they'll do is they'll enter the data for us, and I'll be able to reconcile the bank accounts. I'll be able to print checks or do the bill pay online. And so I worked on that today and yesterday, and I think we're in a good spot. So we'll do a weekly document exchange with them on Tuesdays, and that should keep everything moving quite smoothly. So I think that's a great improvement and helps me get my focus back onto the airport side versus, trying to rally paper, and that'll be a big help. Let's talk about the open house. Open house, in my opinion, was very successful. We were under 50,000 attendees, in case anybody thought that we were going to break a record, but I think the number is probably closer to the 4,000 to 5,000 range. We don't really have an accurate count. I mean, there wasn't a real good method of doing that, but it was a steady day. I know that I saw many of you out there on that day, and I think the crowd was enthusiastic, and it was a good age range. There were a lot of young kids out there, not a lot of teenagers. But the youngsters seemed to really enjoy the hands-on demos that was going on in the South Hangar. I had great feedback from people that were not only attendees, but from tenants on the airfield. As you know, the Airport Authority budgets $5,000 for that event. We did, with the help of Member Harris, Member Rogers, we went out and raised another 10 grand. It's $10,250 to be exact. Our expenses came in about $11,850, and so right now we're sporting an income from that event. So I think there's some gives me good vibrations about next year's event and what we can do to get ahead of that. We did do a open house committee postmortem the week following and got some great feedback. I did also send out a survey through SurveyMonkey, and I'll kind of get all that information together and see what kind of feedback we have from our vendors and our sponsors. I think the one event that I don't think turned out really well was the Speakers Forum, and there's probably a couple reasons for that, but what I do think is that people are there to see and touch, and to corral them in to sit and listen seemed to be much more difficult. There were some really great speakers. There was a gentleman out of Dayton who used to be a flight director for NASA, and so I think we can reach out into our community and maybe have some smaller type events, maybe in the terminal building, have a couple of speakers. So I think that's a more appropriate use of that opportunity than the open house. But that was some of the feedback that I've gotten. I will be in Sacramento beginning Sunday through Wednesday for the Southwest chapter meeting of the AAAE. Always some great information that comes out of that. Also have a good opportunity to interact with our consultant for the master plan, which will be is Kaufman. And then there's always some FAA folks there, so that'll give us a chance to work with them as well. I already talked about the Airport Council and I attending the Board of Supervisors meeting. Our maintenance tech, Gary Province, as you know, he did get to attend a training session up at Reno a couple of months ago, and he was enthusiastic about it and made some good contacts with the folks at the airfield maintenance there. And he and I completed the NOTA manager training in just the last couple of weeks. So we are online now and able to post NOTAMs via NOTA manager, and that's a really great asset as opposed to trying to go through the flight service station or the methods that we previously had at our disposal. As you may recall, we were going to all get new email addresses so that we could not use our personal emails. Well, we've just done the installation. It did cause a little bit of a hiccup in the last week getting some of the documents out. My address book had to be repopulated, but thus the late delivery on Monday for some of this stuff. But more importantly, you'll be able to use your first initial and your last name at Fly Carson City for your official duties as Airport Authority members. And I'm going to send you out an email to contact JFG Systems to do the setup. This is not an email server, so you're going to have some method of accessing online, and he'll walk you through that. It's relatively painless, but I think it's a good look for the airport to be able to do that. I was joking for a while that the reason that it says manager at Fly Carson City is that when they replace me, that they don't have to get rid of the email. So this is going to kind of cement my tenure here for at least another couple of months. As you know, we did host the Master Plan Committee meeting on the 27th. Well-attended meeting. We had, I think everybody was there except for maybe one of the committee members, and then we followed that right up with the workshop shortly thereafter. I was a little disappointed in the attendance from that, especially from the city fathers. We do have the manager of planning on the committee, so that's really one of the key people we want. I was hoping to get some of the Board of Supervisors out and some of the department heads. It didn't flow that way, but we'll keep bugging them. And one other thing that I've mentioned in passing, but I haven't talked about it in front of the board directly, is that there was an economic impact study done by NDOT in like early 2000s, 2004 or 5, I think. At that time, it was estimated that the Carson City Airport impacted communities about $30 million a year. Well, that's old news. We've gone through a recession since then, and reinsurgence in the economy, and the airport has had major renovations and investments done since that study was undertaken. So I reached out to UNR professor Tom Harris, who does a lot of economic impact studies in the area. He's done one for the Reno airport. He's done several for hospitals and other entities, and he is going to do one for the Airport Authority, and he's going to have it done for us by September. So I think that is going to be a real feather in our cap as going forward as far as economic development is concerned. I'm flowing materials to him now, contact lists for vendors and airport operators. So there may be some of that stuff start showing up in your mailbox, a letter to ask you to fill out information like on employees and salaries and benefits and that sort of stuff, expenditures that are in the community. But that's how they gather that data to formulate the report. So it's really a cooperative effort. So I'll be sending out an email to all the tenants, letting them know, or primarily our business operators. But if it does come up in conversation, we want people to be aware that it's ongoing, it's underway. I'm really excited about that. I can't tell you how important I think that's going to be for our ability to develop our business community on the airport.
Mr. Moen, is there a cost for that?
Yes, it is. It's $2,000, which happens to be right at my authority. And I thought, hey, we made $4,000 on the open house. We got some money. One other thing that we've done very recently is just we don't have it operational as of yet, but we have an ADS-B receiving equipment installed at our airport, and the cost of that was $0. And so right now our big objective is to kind of get the filters set up so that we're not looking at overflights at 40,000 feet, though our traffic count could go through the roof if we utilize that. But this will allow us to do a much more accurate traffic count, and we'll not only know numbers, we'll know types of aircraft, and it'll be very, very helpful to us going forward. And the trade-off is they give us the equipment, but they also have access to the data. I don't see the downside to that, but it's an off-the-shelf product, and it's super easy to install, and I really feel privileged that we're going to be like on the cutting edge in this area for having that data. I'm not aware of any other airport in the surrounding area that has the equipment currently on hand. I know Truckee Tahoe does some tracking, but they don't use ADS-B to do it.
They use ADS-B. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't recall what they use.
There's a
They said it was like that, but it wasn't.
yeah, there's a couple off-the-shelf products.
They've had it for a while. It was
Yep.
extremely expensive.
Right.
In fact, I was on the board and voted against it when it was authorized because, sorry, Brian, thanks. I was not in favor of it when it was authorized because it was a mid-six-figure investment. And it was, in my opinion, it was like, what the heck? You know, you don't need this. And they did it, and they have it. These ADS-B receivers, though, are all over the place. They really are. So,
And I think for non-towered airports, it's a much more accurate method of getting data on your operations than game cameras, or I think some people have sound sensors that try to track data, but I just don't think those are going to be as useful as this equipment is. So I'll report back to you once we've had a chance to play with it and understand it a little bit better, but I'm really excited about that. So with that, that's my report. If you have any questions or comments.
Mr. Golden.
one comment I've been meaning to make to you, and I'll make it in front of all the members of the Airport Authority. Considering the time you had as airport manager, I felt the open house was a huge success. It was one of the better ones we ever had. You know, the only downside, which you don't control, was that there weren't a lot of aircraft flying. That said, it was a really hot day, and that can deter people from getting up in the air. But the attendance was very good. The vendors were good. The ground participation was very good. I commend you for your efforts. And as to the speakers, I had happened to walk in on one of the speakers, which was Dr. Larkin, who's a mutual friend of ours, and his presentation was very well attended. He had quite a few people in there.
Thank you for that. I want to have the moment to thank the people on the Open House Committee, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Harris, but also Gary Province, Dirk and his wife both assisted. Josie Martell with our marketing agency in Bogue, she did an awesome job for us. And I just thought that everybody really pitched in. The vendors, our businesses on the airport were very supportive. Our vendors were supportive. People just really, I think maybe they wanted to help me look good. So I really appreciated that because a lot of that was on them. And I thought the tenants just really came out in good force and brought out a lot of unique aircraft that you don't normally get to see out there. And that was great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your support as well.
I would echo those comments. Any further questions or comments to Mr. Moen?
Mr. Moen, do you have a traffic count for us in recent months?
When we went to pull the game camera, there was absolutely nothing on it. So no, I do not. So I tried to go by that with the ADSB, hoping that we'll get a little bit more accurate information here in the next month. But I don't know what the malfunction was. Gary came back and said that the memory card was just totally blank.
I would guess temperature failure, because I've had that happen with digital camera. Thank you. Moving on, legal counsel's report. Mr. Takis.
I would just say that Mr. Moen and I did go to the Board of Supervisors, but really Mr. Moen went. I just sat in the gallery as backup for him. He did a great job. And so my expectation is that he will be the primary voice of the Airport Authority in front of the Board of Supervisors from here on out. I don't have anything else to report.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Takis? All right. Moving forward, treasurer's report. Since our treasurer is out of the area this evening, I have received, and we will put into the record, the reports that were provided to us this afternoon by Mr. Moen. For those of you who may have questions on this, you can direct your questions to him. And if there's anything that Mr. Moen can't answer, we can refer that to Mr. Harvey when he returns. Other than that, I would move forward to report of authority members. Does anyone have any comments regarding status or review of projects, communications, administrative matters, correspondence, or other reports from authority members? None seen. We'll move forward. Is there any final public comment for this evening's meeting? Hearing none. Anybody who has agenda items that are they would like to see placed on the agenda for August, please make sure that Mr. Moen gets those in advance so that he can have them to create his draft agenda from. Are there any other questions or comments before we adjourn the meeting this evening? Seeing none, we are adjourned.